Welcome to 2021, everyone. We are excited, super excited to have you join us today. We have a large crowd to start a new year, and it's a beautiful January day, so we sure appreciate you joining us instead of being outside and enjoying the sunshine. Without further ado, I want to present our first speaker, Dr. Mickey Taylor. He received his PhD in environmental toxicology from Clemson University. His experience includes 20 years as a greenhouse, nursery, landscape, and garden center owner, head grower, and pesticide applicator for his 55,000 square feet greenhouse operation. After 1998, his research explored the efficacy of constructed wetlands for remediating nutrients and pesticides from commercial nursery operations. In 2006, he became the director of research for a small biotechnology startup company in UGA's Biobusiness Center, working to commercialize a biopesticide booster product. In 2011, he became a senior agricultural advisor in USDA's Foreign Agricultural Services Civilian Response Corps, where he spent one tour in Afghanistan running a demonstration farm and working with Bagram detention facilities, agriculture teachers to re-educate Taliban detainees that were deemed low risk. 4 years ago, he became the coordinator for UGA's pesticide safety education program and has been working since then to improve and modernize the program. Welcome, Mickey. The floor is yours.
I wanted to mention to everyone that I've designed and made, through help with the Georgia Department of Ag, some record-keeping manuals that are specific for Georgia for both commercial applicators of all different categories and for private applicators. There's a long address here for the website to find them. The easiest way is to use the UGA PSEP and go to my webpage, and that will take you to the either a private or a commercial applicator page where you can click on the link. Okay. I also have a number of study guides for the core manual and for some of the category manuals, including ornamental and turf, category 24, plant agriculture, category 21, aquatic pest control, category 26, as well as mosquito control, category 41. There will be more introduced as new manuals come available. Forestry is expected to be done probably by the beginning of the summer. Animal agriculture is also in the production process, as is a new rights-of-way manual. Again, the easiest way is to search UGA PSEP and click the link for either a commercial or a private applicator, depending on what you are. Now, to get started with today's talk, we're going to go into a number of things about pesticide labeling. I want you to have an idea of what happens before you see a pesticide on the market, all the different things that the companies go through to be able to have a product to sell. I want you to understand the difference between the label and labeling. That's a fine line there, but you are responsible for complying with both the label and the labeling, so you need to know the difference. And then to be able to read and understand the pesticide label and recognize that some uses are inconsistent with the labeling and therefore are violations of federal law. The US EPA is responsible under FIFRA from 1972, as amended since then, for reviewing every registered pesticide product. They can require the company to make changes to their label, and they have to approve all the language in the label to make sure that it complies with federal law and that there are no possibilities for you to injure yourself or others, as long as you follow the directions on that label. We'll go through what it takes to register a new pesticide. You can see here it goes through laboratory screening of a potential pesticide. Then they go to the laboratory and field testing, label registration, and then they finally have a product that they can sell. This takes anywhere from 6 to 10 years. And even back in 2010 to 2014, it was costing a company $286 million to put one product on the market. You can imagine how much of that product they have to sell to make back that $286 million. The manufacturer has to conduct scientific tests, both toxicity tests and efficacy or performance tests. Then they have to go through a set of tests that describe how the pesticide moves in the environment, what types of residues and how dangerous they are in the environment, and how the product is broken down in the environment and how quickly that happens. They also need to be able to describe what the effects are on non-target organisms and the environment in general. EPA gets all of that data in one huge package. They then go through the proposed label, look at the data, they can ask for additional tests or that the label be revised, and eventually it ends up as a product on the market. The pesticide has to undergo thorough toxicity testing. They want to know how toxic it is to humans, wildlife, and all the other types of non-target organisms that might be out there so they can judge whether that product can go on to the market or not. Many of them, as you can imagine, never make it to market. The efficacy tests are designed to tell you whether or not the pesticide manages the pest, how well it does that. And then does that particular pesticide cause plant damage or burn, which is termed phytotoxicity. All those things are things that you're interested in when you go to use a product. EPA is primarily interested in the environmental fate of the pesticide, how it's degraded, how it moves, and what residues are there. So they want to know what happens after it's applied. Does it move into the soil and then into groundwater? Or does it stay in the soil, get bound up there and get degraded? Or does it move into the plant and move up through the plant and may end up in the parts of the plant that may end up as food or forage for animals? They also have tests that describe what the effects are in the environment to fish, wildlife, groundwater, surface water, and a vast number of non-target organisms. EPA will establish for agricultural pesticides a residue tolerance, the maximum residue limit, and that's the maximum amount of that pesticide that's legally allowed on or in food or feed at the time of harvest or slaughter. From that time on, it's going to continue to degrade, so it will go down from there, but they want to set a maximum amount there. And then the pre-harvest interval is a period of time before a crop or a fruit or vegetable is harvested that gives it time for the pesticide to be degraded so that they will meet that MRL when they actually harvest it. Okay, now to the difference between label and labeling. We'll start with this part about the label. You may not know it, but when you buy that pesticide, you're buying and agreeing to a binding legal agreement between the product registrant, which is the manufacturer who writes those label instructions, the EPA that reviews the data, registers the pesticide, and approves the label, and you. And as you'll notice, you're at the bottom of the list. That means you must comply by federal law with all label instructions and use directions. Any variation from those instructions or use directions means that you're in violation of federal law and can be prosecuted for it. The label itself is actually the information that's either printed on the container or it's in a booklet that's attached to the pesticide container. That can vary anywhere from a single page to hundreds of pages, as people have found lately, as pesticide labels have gotten larger and larger. The labeling includes the label, plus everything else you can get from the manufacturer on the legal and proper use of that pesticide. And that can include brochures, leaflets, and flyers, as well as other things. It also includes the worker protection standard information if you happen to be subject to the worker protection standard. And it includes endangered species protection if there are any endangered species in areas where you might be working. It can refer to another source for the complete precautionary information. And in that case, you're required to go get that precautionary information from the other source. There are a number of PAD registration approvals. The first one is made by EPA. No pesticide can be sold in the U.S. until EPA reviews all that data that the manufacturer gives them and determines that the product doesn't present an unreasonable risk to humans or the environment. They then approve the language that the registrant wants to use in the label, and EPA reviews registrations every 15 years to make sure that new data hasn't come to light that might make them take it off the market. The Georgia Department of Ag also registers all pesticides used in Georgia. And that includes ones called special local needs pesticides and emergency exemption pesticides. The standard federal registration is called Section 3 registration. Most of your pesticides are registered under Section 3. They have an official EPA registration number, which you will see as an REG number on the product. It is unique for each product, and each manufacturer has a set of numbers that correspond to the registration number for every one of their products. Those number sets identify the manufacturer or the company that produces it, the specific product, and a distributor if there's a distributor involved. The products, except ones called minimum risk, also have an EPA establishment number. That'll be an EST number. It'll say EPA EST period. And that identifies the actual facility that produced the pesticide. So if you have a problem with it and report it to the Georgia Department of Ag and it gets reported to EPA that there's some problem with it, they can go back and look at the records at manufacturers and see exactly where the problem arose and fix the problem so that it doesn't happen again. The special local needs registrations is called an SLN or 24C registration. The states actually apply to EPA for an SLN, and it's used if there's not a pesticide available for a desired site, or there's not a pesticide that's available that can't be applied without causing unacceptable risk, or if it's necessary to maintain an IPM or resistant management or a minor use control program. The minor use control program is what's primarily used in the nursery industry and greenhouse industry because their sales are so small that otherwise they'd never have a approved product for their operation. And if it could be replaced by another less risky formulation, the state can request that as well under a special local needs registration. They act as an option to allow the use of pesticides on regional crops. They can be used to manage localized pest problems or both of those. The registrants must provide supplemental labeling for each special local needs registration. So each state gets a label for that state, and that label includes a 2-letter abbreviation code for that state. For us, it would be GA. You cannot use a special local needs pesticide that's labeled for GA in South Carolina or North Carolina or Alabama or Florida. It's only available as a special local needs pesticide in Georgia. There's another type of registration called Section 18. It's considered an emergency exemption. This is to respond to pest problems for which there are no pesticides registered. EPA can issue an exemption at the request of the Georgia Department of Ag, and it's only used when there's no other feasible way to respond to the pest emergency. It's for a specific non-registered purpose for a specified period, and it has certain requirements for record keeping that you have to comply with. You can think of this as if we get an invasive species that's introduced suddenly into Georgia, there might be a Section 18 exemption to control that particular pest. There are 4 types of them: a specific exemption, which is to avert a significant economic loss or major risk to the environment. There's a quarantine exemption to control the spread of an introduced pest. There's a public health exemption for controlling pests that have caused significant risks to human health, such as the Aedes aegypti that was spreading Zika virus a few years ago. And then there's a crisis exemption to permit use when time is too short to allow for one of the other types to be approved. The regulations impose strict controls and record-keeping requirements on anyone that uses those products. I'll just mention minimum risk pesticides briefly. They're not subject to registration. It's a special class called the 25B exemption. All the active and inert ingredients in them are demonstrably safe. The active ingredients must be on a particular list, the inactive on another list. And the reason for this is basically these things don't work. So they don't have to be registered and they don't get a EPA registration number. Think of things like clove oil or some other product like that somebody's trying to sell. And as long as they're on those 2 lists, they can try to sell it, but you can't expect that the material works very much. There are a couple different classes of applicators in the state. Private certified applicators are those producing an agricultural, forestry, or horticultural commodity. They go through a training program that I've designed that's almost as rigorous as what commercial applicators have to go through. And they must complete that and get licensed before they can use or supervise the use of any restricted use product in Georgia. They also are subject to record-keeping requirements. Then most of you are probably certified commercial applicators. You're applying pesticides to another person's land. And if you have a contractor's license, you can charge a fee for the service. You all must pass a written exam on the core manual for applying pesticides both correctly and safely. And you must pass a written exam on additional material for 1 or more categories that you're requesting certification in. Typically, most are in category 24, the turf and ornamental, but there's also a large number of applicators in category 41, the mosquito control. That became very popular the last couple of years. There are certain licensing fees that you have to pay every year or every 5 years, depending on when your license expires. All the different types of applicators, commercial and private, have to understand federal and Georgia laws and regs, emergency procedures to follow when something goes wrong, the importance of following label instructions, how and when to correctly use pesticide application equipment, the proper use and care of their personal protective equipment, including respirators, and the need for keeping accurate application records. That's why I developed these Georgia-specific record-keeping manuals. And then the importance of positive open communication with your employer, if you're not the employer yourself, your employees, your customers, and the public. All that contributes to whether or not you're going to have a successful business. There are 2 classifications, use classifications for pesticides. There's the restricted use pesticide. These are pesticides or concentrations of pesticides that EPA deems requires additional regulatory restrictions on them to avoid unreasonable adverse effects on humans, non-target organisms, or the environment. And only certified applicators or trained people working under their direct supervision can use restricted use pesticides. And you can find on the front of the panel, usually the front upper left-hand corner of the label, it'll be a box that says restricted use pesticide, and it'll tell you why it's a restricted use pesticide. All others are unclassified or general use pesticides if they have an EPA registration number. And anyone can, both trained applicators and the general public can buy those. Most of the general public buys their pesticides from Lowe's, Home Depot, Walmart, that sort of thing. They're very low concentrations, and they're also a lot cheaper. If they were to go to a pesticide store, a distributor like you would, they would find the pesticide available, but very expensive. So they primarily don't do that. Supervision comes under the minimum federal standard. This has not changed as yet. It may change sometime in the near future, but unless the label specifies something different from it, as long as a competent person acting under the instructions and control of a certified applicator that's available if and when needed, that person can apply the restricted use pesticide. Being available if and when needed basically means you both have cell phones and can contact each other immediately if something serious goes wrong. You don't have to be physically present, but it's probably a good idea if you are around, if you're unsure of how competent that person is. Now, you've probably heard this a number of times, but I'll say it again. The label is the law. Any violation of the label is a violation of federal law. You want to read that label before you buy the pesticide because the labels change quite often. Before you store it, so you know how to store it, before you mix it and apply it so that you get the dilution correct and you're not applying a too concentrated a material to your site, that becomes a violation of law. And then before you dispose of the unused pesticide or any empty containers or even containers that still have pesticide in them that you no longer need to use. Now, a lot of people get the term pesticide confused. A pesticide is just a product that controls a pest. It can be an insecticide, a fungicide, a bactericide, a rodenticide, even a defoliant or a desiccant or a repellent or a nematicide. All these different things are types of pesticide. So a pesticide is just like saying it's a dog. And when you go to whether it's a beagle or a Labrador, that's when you're deciding whether it's a herbicide or an insecticide or one of these others. The label indicates on it what pest the product will control. It will give you a list of the various pests that should be controlled by it. There are basically 5 parts to a pesticide label. I break them down into basically 4. The identifying information we'll go over first, then precautionary statements, directions for use, and storage and disposal directions. The 5th part is the conditions of sale. That's where the manufacturer says that they're not liable for anything. You're liable for any misuse of the product, or if anything goes wrong with the product, it's on you, not on them. And at the most, they will refund you your money, but nothing else. That part's the same on all labels, so I pretty much ignore that. The identifying information consists of a use classification box indicating a restricted use pesticide. If it doesn't have that RUP box, it's a general use or unclassified. Then it gives you the names, the ingredients, both active and inert, the net contents, some signal words that'll tell you how toxic the material is, and then the manufacturer's name and address, the EPA registration and establishment numbers so that the EPA can track that product. If it's restricted use, there's always a statement box that appears at the top of the front label. Anything else is an unclassified or general use. And you'll note with this example, it's due to its very high toxicity to humans and birds. And then it will always say for retail sale to and use only by certified applicators or persons under their direct supervision, and only for the uses covered by your certification. So if you're a turf and ornamental person, you can't go buy a right-of-way restricted use pesticide and use that, or a private applicator that works on a farm can't go and buy a pesticide that's only available for use on ornamental and turf plantings. So your certifications for the various categories that you've been tested on, those are the only products you can buy on the market legally. The names include 3 different types of names: brand, chemical, and common. The chemical name is usually a very complicated one. It describes the chemistry of the active ingredient. In this case, 1-naphthalene methylcarbamate. EPA has approved a number of shorter names, one for each of the products out there, unless they haven't come up with one yet. So in this case, 1-naphthalene methylcarbamate is Carbaryl. The company that's manufacturing it will come up with a trade name. This particular product, their trade name is 7. Now, if you go out and buy a product called 7, you may not get the Carbaryl. If it's 7 plus or something, it may be some other chemical. So you don't buy by the trade name. You only buy by the common name or the chemical name. That's the only way to ensure that you're getting what you think you're getting. The ingredient statement includes both active ingredients. Those are the chemicals responsible for the pesticidal activity or that perform the desired function, such as defoliation. The inert ingredients are usually not named because they're proprietary information of the manufacturer. They do not have pesticidal activity. They may help the pesticide work better, but they do not on their own add any activity to the pesticide. And there will be on the label the percentage of each of them. Net contents gives you the total amount of the product in each container. It can be expressed as pounds, ounces, gallons, or pints, and a number of others. You have to determine the total amount of active ingredient per container. You've got to use the rate of active ingredient in the container. For dry products, you just use the percentage of that container to give you the amount of the active ingredient you have there. If it's a liquid product, such as Demon, you've got to look and read and see that they're 3 pounds. I think that says 3 pounds or so many pounds per gallon of the active ingredient are in that pint. So you then have to convert to the number of pints and the number of pounds per pint to be able to tell how much of the active ingredient you have in that container. Signal words tell you how toxic it is. They indicate the relative acute toxicity. That's any symptom that appears within 24 hours to humans or animals. If it's a very low toxicity thing, like minimum the 25B ones, signal words aren't required. But almost all the products you'll see will have the signal words on there. The labels will also say keep out of the reach of children, which warns you to keep them locked up so that children can't get to the product. And the hazard of that particular pesticide depends on the pesticide's toxicity and how much of it you're exposed to. If it says danger poison with skull and crossbones before and after danger poison, it's extremely toxic. Anything less than, say, half a teaspoon could kill a full-grown man, have a good 50% chance of killing a full-grown man. If it says just danger, the chances of it causing skin or eye damage are higher than just the toxicity of it. So you need to be more concerned about getting it on your skin and in your eyes. And it will describe what the dangers are on the label there. Warning, products are only moderately toxic. However, you have to read the label carefully to see whether it's one that's toxic if you ingest it or get it on your skin, or whether it causes burning or eye damage if you get it in your eyes or on your skin. So you have to read warning labels very carefully to see exactly how you're exposed to the product and how dangerous it might be to you upon exposure. Then caution or slightly toxic products. It may take a pint or more of swallowing a pint or more of a product before it had a chance of killing you, but it can still kill you if you get exposed to enough of it. It is a poison. Just remember that. Then the manufacturer's name and address, the registrations number, come on there. You'll find the EPA reg number there, establishment number, the active ingredients, the total other ingredients there, and that information is there in case you have to report a problem with a particular pesticide. The precautionary statements are the next thing we'll talk about. They will usually start off with the hazards to humans and domestic animals. It'll repeat the caution, danger, warning, danger, poison, your signal word. It will then tell you the routes of entry into your body, whether it's, in this case, maybe fatal if swallowed or inhaled. It may give you specific action statements, such as avoid contact with skin or clothing. And then it will list the protective clothing that you will have to use while you're handling this pesticide. The PPE, you must, by law, follow all directions for it stated on the label. And those directions may indicate that handlers and mixers that are handling the concentrated product have to wear a certain level of PPE. An applicator that's just spraying the product around may not have to wear as much, or they may have to wear just as much. And then the people that maintain the equipment or clean up afterwards may have a listing for what PPE they have to wear. The lack of a statement on there doesn't mean you do not need further protection. If you're concerned about being poisoned by a pesticide, it might be a good idea to wear a respirator, whether or not it says to wear a respirator. The same thing about more elaborate personal protective equipment. Let's see, we'll go to the first aid statement. It'll have the first aid and treatments for poisoning or accidental exposure. It usually starts off, if it gets in your eyes, you've got to flush your eyes for 15 minutes with clean water, and then possibly get medical attention. Over that 15-minute period, you can go through 6 gallons of liquid, 6 gallons of clean water, or 6 gallons of eye wash material. So that's quite a bit that you have to have on site in case you get it in your eyes. If it's swallowed, in this case, it tells you to call a physician or poison control center. It also tells you to induce vomiting. It may tell you do not induce vomiting. If it's a emulsifiable concentrate with a organic solvent or a petroleum solvent keeping the pesticide in solution or as an emulsion, you don't want to induce vomiting because it will burn the esophagus every time it comes up. So you have to read the label carefully and follow the directions if you happen to get it swallowed. And the best way to do that is to get your hands near your face or near your lips, and any material you have on your hands will transfer to the lips and you'll end up swallowing some. If you inhale it, it'll tell you to remove them to fresh water. If they're not breathing, to give them artificial respiration. Then to get medical attention, there may be more things that you need to do, such as flooding their personal protective equipment to get any pesticide off of there, getting them out of that, getting them where they can get cooler. There'll also be in directions if you get it on your skin and what to do in that case. There will also be a note to the physician describing medical treatment for poisoning emergencies. It may or may not identify an antidote if the product has an antidote. Labels must be available in case of emergency, so I always recommend you have a notebook with all the labels of products that you use available in the truck at your application site. That way, if someone gets poisoned, you can pop out that label or just take the entire booklet of them to the physician and flip over and show them the physician exactly how to treat that poisoning event. Sometimes they recommend taking the pesticide with you. I don't really recommend that. If you do take it, it should be in the back of a truck. It should not be in any part of the truck where people reside. Because if you have an accident, they can get exposed even more. There will also be emergency contact information. It's found on just about all the labels in the statement of practical treatment. Chemtrec is almost always listed there. They're manned 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It'll tell you if you've got a spill, leak, or fire, or a medical emergency, different numbers to call. If you have a life-threatening emergency, call 911 first. If it's less serious, you may call the Poison Control Center. Some pesticides may have a manufacturer's number on there. That would be the one I would select to call because they know exactly what their product does. So they would have the most up-to-date information. Engineering controls are optional. They will be on some products and not on other products. If there are specific devices you need to use when handling the pesticide, it will tell you that. And then if you need to take special precautions for a specific application method, it'll give you that information as well. This is typically in the same position on the label, but it can move around some. Next will be an environmental hazard statements. It'll provide information on the environmental impacts associated with that particular pesticide. It'll tell you what types of creatures might be harmed by it and what things you need to avoid doing. If it's one that will kill bees and other pollinators, there will be detailed information about that. EPA has come up with this pollinator protection label. You'll see it with a diamond shape around a red diamond shape around a honeybee. When you see that, you know the product is a problem for pollinators, and you need to follow that information very carefully because everybody notices bee kills. And they will call Georgia Department of Ag or somebody, and then there will be an investigation of a bee kill. Physical or chemical hazards is an optional part of the label that can be found anywhere in the label. It's up to the manufacturer where they put it. It's only there if there's special fire or explosive or chemical hazards associated with that particular pesticide. If it's flammable or corrosive, it'll tell you the things that you need to avoid. Directions for use will come next. It will start off with it's a violation of federal law to use this product in a manner inconsistent with the labeling. Read all directions for use carefully before applying. And it can have a number of sections in there that'll describe complying with worker protection standard, modes of action, resistance management, buffer zones, spray drift requirements. All sorts of things can be in the directions for use section. There can also be the worker protection standard information. If you happen to be an agricultural, be non-agricultural labels at times that'll have both agricultural and non-agricultural uses. This often happens with the turf and ornamental products. Often there'll be no REI required for a non-agricultural part of the label. All you have to do is wait until the spray dries and the dust has settled before getting back in there. The agricultural people have to wait so many hours before they can go back in. And even then, early entry workers must wear personal protective equipment, which is outlined there. The non-agricultural use requirements are found on any pesticide label that has both agricultural and non-agricultural uses. Okay, the label will give you detailed instructions on how to use the product. It'll give you the pests that it controls, the specific directions for controlling those pests, the particular crops or sites that are intended for protection, how to handle and mix and use the product, and then whether or not there's any phytotoxicity associated with it. In this case, this label can be used on both ornamental plants in mosquito control and as a cleanup spray for protecting grains in storage areas, elevators, and bins. So it has a wide number of uses and a fairly long label. The pre-harvest interval I mentioned before, it's the minimum number of days that have to pass before a crop can be harvested after use of a pesticide. That's primarily for farmers. It allows it to break down below the MRL before they harvest anything. Uses inconsistent with the labeling include applying to or on plants, animals, or sites not stated on the label. So if it doesn't have the site that you're applying it to on the label, you cannot use that material. Applying at a higher than labeled rate is an inconsistent use of it. Not wearing that PPE that it tells you to wear is an inconsistent use. And then mishandling it, storing it near food or water or veterinary supplies is also an inconsistent use. You need to know your pesticide label and follow that label. Now, a lot of times people get confused that since higher than labeled rate is an inconsistent use, what about lower than labeled rate? That is not an inconsistent use of the pesticide. You can use it at a lower than labeled rate, but to prevent resistance from developing, you better monitor and make sure that you're killing the number of pests that you're expecting to kill and that you keep the pests under control so that it doesn't develop resistance. Remember that the host or site must be on the label, but the pest doesn't have to be listed. So if you think the product is killing, if it's labeled to kill something similar to a pest that you have, you can use it for that pest, even though that pest may not be specifically listed on the label, as long as the host or site is on the label. And you can use any application method that's not prohibited by the label, except chemigation. And that's primarily for your farmers. Again, if they use it to chemigate, putting it through a water system, it must say that it's allowed to be used through chemigation, and it will outline on the label the proper procedures for doing it safely. A pesticide can be used at a lower dose than specified on the label, but not at a higher dose. Pesticides may be combined with other substances unless prohibited by the label. The manufacturer, if he knows it can't be mixed with another product, he must tell you that on the label. He doesn't have to tell you that it can be mixed with this and that product of somebody of another manufacturer, that's up to you to figure out. But if he knows it can't be mixed and used safely, he must tell you that. And then storage and disposal is the last part. It will tell you how to store it and give you a description of the things you have to avoid. Then for disposal, it'll tell you how to go about disposing of pesticide waste. Typically, they are considered hazardous waste, and that can be very expensive to have too much of that. You then have to become a different level and go through a lot more paperwork and pay to get those products or that waste disposed of. Container disposal, you're going to triple rinse as soon as the container is empty. Then you can puncture it and dispose of it in a sanitary landfill if allowed. For Georgia, you cannot incinerate it or bury it. This dispose of by incineration, if allowed by state and local authorities, that is totally disallowed in Georgia. So always remember, you can't bury a pesticide container or burn it, even though it might say something about that on the label. And I think I'm slightly ahead of schedule, Bodie.
No problems there. In fact, you addressed one of the questions that came up in the chat box. Chuck asked, where can we dispose of empty pesticide containers? So I think you went over that. Do you want to open the questions and answers and read those yourself? There are two more.
I'm not sure I'll be able to see them well enough.
Okay, no problem. I will read those to you. Elsa has asked, what is being done to improve disposal of leftover pesticides in Georgia, especially for the small private operator? There are few locations very infrequently available.
I'm afraid nothing much is being done besides the Georgia Department of Ag asking the state assembly to give them money for it every year, and it's usually denied. The best way to improve that situation is to talk to your legislators and tell them you want money set aside for Georgia Clean Days. There is one coming up. I think it's in April. I'll be posting it on my website shortly, but you can always check with the Georgia Department of Ag. Rick Hayes there is the person in charge of the Clean Days. He usually has at least one around the state every year. When he can find money, there will be more of them. We had about 4 a few years ago, but the money's just not available. So contact your legislator and get him working on it.
Thank you, Mickey. The other question comes from Angie Lewis. Is it correct that the holder of the pesticide license is still technically responsible for the application of a RUP applied by an unlicensed applicator? Also, does the license holder have to give consent for someone else to work under their license, even if it is a supervisor who is not the license holder? If you want to break that into two, that'll be fine.
Okay. Basically, the license holder is responsible for the application of the pesticide. For commercial people, it would be for all the pesticides, both restricted use and non-restricted use pesticides. They don't have to give written permission, but they are subject to proving that they gave the individual sufficient information to safely and effectively apply that pesticide before they let them go out there and do it. So basically, you're responsible. So the better job you do training your people, the less worry you have. And the best way to do that is make sure they go, give them training sessions, make sure you record that data and keep that record for a couple of years in case a lawsuit comes up.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you addressed the second part of the question. Also, does the
Tell us again.
license hold have to give consent for someone else to work under their license, even if it is a supervisor who is not the license holder?
Basically, they are giving consent if they give them the proper instructions to apply that pesticide. That's tacit permission when you go to the trouble of training the person and directing them. You are the supervisor. So even if it's your supervisor, you're supervising your supervisor when they're applying the pesticide.
Got you. Thank you.
Okay.
Terry Bowen has a question. If you know your disposal company sends you pesticide containers to a landfill, is it illegal to put your pesticide containers into the trash?
Okay, so read that one again.
If you know your disposal company sends your pesticide containers to a landfill, is it illegal to put your pesticide containers into the trash?
As long as they are triple rinsed as soon as they're emptied and cut or destroyed so that they can't hold material, yes, it is legal to put them in trash. You want to make sure that the landfill will accept them. So if your disposal company tells you that they dispose of it at the landfill, then you can put it in your trash and get rid of it that way. But you must destroy that container, and it must be triple rinsed. It can have stains on it, but it cannot have any residues on it.
Got you. Thank you. That was very clear. Any other questions? We've got a few minutes. Mickey, I always remember when I listened to your talks on pesticides, pesticide applications, and that I remember in my times when I was spraying for pesticides in Florida. I was doing my internship in Apopka, and we sprayed some massive quantities of pesticides because it was a very large operation. And I remember how important it was to get all these details before we even started spraying as interns, as far as where the pesticides were located, how do you properly read the label. A lot of us were from foreign countries. Our supervisors made sure that we understood everything. So we had these miniature sessions, and they took time away from, say, watering and fertilizing. And we did quite thorough reviews of those steps. And of course, we had to write down every time that we applied, what we applied, even if it were on a schedule that was supposed to be set up for several months ahead of a time. And yeah, I remember how detailed it was and how important it was. Yeah.
Yeah, those record keeping manuals are really good for Georgia, I think, because the inspectors, the chief inspector for Georgia actually went through it and made sure that I had explained all the different laws and regulations for Georgia so that there was no confusion about what types of information needed to be recorded. So as long as if you use that manual, I think you'll find that you can impress your inspector when he comes by and not have as much time devoted to being inspected. I know that's what I did in South Carolina when I had the business. He came by a couple of years and I knew what I was doing, and I didn't see him for the next 15 years.
Give a confidence to your inspector is very important. So absolutely.
Yes.
And just out of curiosity, I know we are into the digital age, so we are moving away from paper. And so maybe I missed when you were talking about those new forms, but are they also available in a format that is completely digital? In other words, can be filled out digitally and saved, so everything is paperless, the whole process?
I'm using them to fund the pesticide safety education program. So right now they're just available as hard copies. But if someone has a scanner, they could scan that into their computer and just create the forms on their own. I have the headings that for each type of form that needs to be filled out. So it would be fairly easy for someone that's some of the younger people anyway that do a lot with computers to make these. I do have digital versions of them. If somebody wanted one, I could probably be persuaded to give them a copy of the fillable form.
Oh, that's a good segue to the last question we have time for. Where can we get those manuals?
Just type in UGA space and PSEP for Pesticide Safety Education Program. Go to that website and click on either commercial applicator page or the private applicator page. And it's just read. It's mostly, I think, in the first or second paragraph, it'll tell you how to get the record keeping manual. I think I even have it in bold, so it should show up pretty well.
Great. Thank you, Mickey.
You're welcome.